Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background of AuditBucket, how it works, and specifically how it can be used in healthcare. So we all know that big data is one of the biggest trends in enterprise today, and we see it as challenge, opportunity, or both. That is the question. We feel it's definitely a huge opportunity, but an opportunity that comes with challenges. So let's talk about those challenges. First are the 3 V's of big data: volume, variability, and velocity. So data doesn't always come in neat formats, and it's accumulating at fantastic rates. So we know that data in the enterprise exists in Word documents, emails, intranet pages, etc. In fact, we know that 75% of that data is unstructured, and the volume lost from not being able to leverage the intelligence in that unstructured data is tremendous. And in fact, 80% of new data is still unstructured, so this is just going to continue to grow. Looking on the volume side, it's amazing that 1.8 zettabytes of data exist in the world right now. 90% of that was created in the last 3 years. The growth rates are staggering. So this leads you to maybe ask the question, how are you ever going to cut through all of that volume and find insight in there? One last challenge is one that is often overlooked by people, and that is the fact that data changes over time. If you think about people or organizations moving, that implies changes in address. Also, you'll notice that almost no company stays on flat revenue forever. It either goes up or down. And in fact, some data changes by definition, such as quarterly reports. This leads to the situation where we're basically drowning in information and starving for knowledge. So let's talk about how AuditBucket works and how it can help you try to cut through that noise and find information that you didn't even know was there. So AuditBucket works by aggregating data into a NoSQL graph database format. We can use views on triggers within a database to create a replication of data into AuditBucket. We can then use a secure RESTful API call to capture that data. And if it's coming out of a relational database, what we'll do is we'll transform it into a NoSQL key-value pair on its way into AuditBucket. The key here is to try to capture as much context and metadata around that data as possible so that later on when we're doing analysis, we have some business context to provide intelligence for. Now, AuditBucket really has 4 core functionalities. First is the engine that just captures the data and then starts to generate the graph connections between these elements of data and find these hidden links. The second is the search capability that gives you a dashboard where you can start interacting with the data. Third is the compare capability that tracks changes to data over time. And we're going to cover that more in just a moment. And the last one is the visualization functionality that lets you see these relationships and connections in a graph representation. Let's look at some data from quarterly revenue reports. Now, this might be day 1 here at the top and day 90 or day 180 here at the bottom, and you can see 2 different quarters of revenue with dramatically different approaches and different results. Now, Sue Harris input the data on day 1 and Phil Jones on day 90, and we see that we went from 100 million to 205 million. Now, what if this data is being provided for a loan application? For a commercial loan? We notice that the risk factor in the loan rate may have been locked in on day 30 with the first input of the data, but in fact that's no longer competitive at the end of the quarter. But what do we know about the data change? Is there any way to track that, to know that it was there, to find out why the rate that was originally offered was offered, and how that relates to the rate that maybe should be offered in an updated loan proposal? That's where AuditBucket Compare comes in. We can also look at the relationships and connections between the data. Now, this graphic is a little bit of a mess, but the idea is to show you that each of these nodes has connections between them, these lines that connect the dots here. They're automatically built based on factors found in the database. So the data is read and processed by AuditBucket Engine. These commonalities are found and stored in the graph database structure of it. And when we drill down and we visualize, let's say, a smaller cluster of nodes, we can see that nodes are sized based on their relevance within the data set. The connection lines have a thickness that indicates the strength between any of the connection between 2 nodes, and the distance and the degrees of separation are self-evident. When we think about that in healthcare, we've thought of two use cases where we can really find some powerful applications. First is on billing. So if we plug a bunch of healthcare billing information into AuditBucket, it will generate a cluster of data that's normal billing data. And normal here means based on, for instance, patterns for that patient or that healthcare provider, or maybe that zip code. And then we can find outliers. And those outliers are our suspected fraudulent billing activity. That's where we can drill down, find problems, and go after them. And when we think about a use case for evidence-based medicine, taking that same data set from before, let's imagine that Amy, Holden, and Mike are sick with the same illness. We can look at the relationships between them, and these here may be things like health history, fitness levels, family historical factors for susceptibility to any particular disease, or so on. And we see that Amy and Holden have a strong relationship, and Amy and Mike have a similarly strong relationship. But we know that there's only a second-degree relationship between Mike and Holden. Now, what that implies for a doctor is when considering these three patients, they can look at the different factors that all of them have in their backgrounds and subscribe a course of treatment appropriate for each. This is something that, believe it or not, is not being done widely within healthcare today. So there you go. That's just a quick overview of AuditBucket and how it can be used to track, find, compare, and explore big data across your organization. Thank you very much.